Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our panelists and attendees from wherever you're signing on to for today. Thank you for joining us today at our IT Regional Radio Communication Seminar being hosted by the CTU on our Zoom webinar platform. My name is Nigel Casimir. I'm the telecommunications specialist at the Caribbean Telecommunications Union Secretariat based in Port of Spain, Trinidad. And just before we get started with the seminar program, I want to share a few tips so that we can all participate successfully. For logging in and next time you log into the webinar, please sign in with your information in this order: first name, last name, organization, and country. So for example, you'll be able to see my sign-in as Nigel Casimir, CTU, TT for Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm based. Use an appropriate abbreviation for your organization and country. This makes you easily identifiable when entering the seminar and also for posing questions and for any interventions that might be possible. Now, during the presentations of our various speakers, we ask that you post any questions you have in the Q&A box in order for them to be seen and efficiently addressed. It is accessible by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of our Zoom windows. Using Q&A is especially important for us in this seminar because there are hundreds of persons participating and there would be limited opportunities for verbal interventions. There's also the chat button, and we'll use the chat button for sharing general comments and information with panelists and or with all attendees. Now, the default setting on the chat button is to all panelists only. So be sure to select your desired recipients when entering your comments in the chat box. Attendees might have it a little bit different. They might default to panelists and attendees, but the message basically is pay attention to who the chat is being directed to. Seminar presentation slides are and would be posted on the event web page on the ITU website. And after today, we have one more day for this seminar. It ends tomorrow, so we hope you will participate with us up to the end. Recordings of the sessions are also available on the ITU event web page. Today, we have two very interesting panels. The first is on IMT and broadband systems. And after the break, we'll have a second panel that will address spectrum pricing. For the first panel, we have our moderator, Mr. Agostinho Liniares. He is a member of the executive board of Regulatel. He's actually based in Brazil with Anatel. But Agostinho will shepherd us through the content of the first panel on IMT and broadband systems. So I will ask Agostinho now to please take the floor and introduce his panelists. Please, Agostinho.
Thank you, Nigel. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon, good night, good evening. Well, in this panel, we are going to have Ms. Luciana Camagos, Ms. Jennifer Manner, Janet Kenneth, and Ms. Marta Soares. Well, I will present the short bill before I give the floor for each panelist. But I would like to say that the ability of each country to take full advantage of the spectrum resource depends heavily on spectrum management activities that facilitate the implementation of radio systems and ensure interference-free operations. Radio communication is heavily used in a growing number of services and applications, such as fixed links, IMT, RLAN, fixed and mobile satellites, and new systems are to come, like hubs. With COVID-19, it is very clear for everyone that telecommunications infrastructure is an essential service for society, and the new normal is anticipating many tendencies. In this new scenario, spectrum plays a special role. The benefits of harmonized utilization of spectrum regionally or globally for such application is evident. Economies of scale, roaming, international coordination are some examples of these benefits. So this panel will discuss present and future bands for IMT and broadband systems. And we have the presence here of these 4 distinguished specialists in the radio communication sector. So I would like to give the floor for the first panelist, Luciana Camargos. She is GSMA's Senior Director of Future Spectrum. She is responsible for the coordination and application of mobile industry positions on spectrum plans, and is the manager of the Future Spectrum team, which looks after GSMA's WRC and I2R activity. She is also responsible for the GSMA's Future Spectrum Group, the global committee of industry experts focused on future spectrum issues for mobile. Prior to this, Luciana worked at Brazilian regulator Anatel and at Access Partnership. Luciana, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Agostinho. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me or see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to go back to where I was with the presentation when we did the test. Everything seems to have moved, and I apologize for that. So in 1 second, I'll be able to put my presentation on. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much for the ITU and also for CTU for the invite at speaking at this seminar. I am a long-standing member and participant of CTU activities, and of course ITUR, RRS Americas. Unfortunately, this time we are here virtually. I would very much like to have been in Trinidad and Tobago right now, but I think we'll have to leave that for next year, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for the invite. It's always a pleasure. For us, we had a really intense cycle, last cycle, with all the discussions for IMT and the millimeter waves, and we were very happy with the results of the WRC. Immediately after WRC 19 ended, a new cycle began, as you all know, it began for you as well. And now we are talking about the role of IMT in WRC 23, what happens to us in this cycle, what our activities are all about, and our future planning of our activities. So before I go into that, I just wanted to talk to you a bit about the mobile industry, 5G, our plans, our impact in society, and everything that we do to try to make this into the industry that it is today. And it's been over 20 years, and this is as much as we have achieved. We expect by 2025 to have 1.8 billion connections. This was in the mobile economy that we launch every year. This is numbers for 2020. Our number for 2019 was that by 2025 we would have 1.2 billion connections. We actually reviewed that upwards because we see it has grown a lot, and 5G has grown in the year of 2019. So accordingly, we review our numbers. In that regard, we saw 16 million jobs, direct jobs in 2019, but over 14 million indirect jobs, and the contribution to GDP, 4.1 trillion in 2019, going up to 4.9 trillion in 2024, and that's a growth of 4.9%, which is really relevant to us. Very confusing on the double 4.9s, and I always get those one mixed, but there you go. So this is why for us this is so important, the discussion of spectrum, because without spectrum we don't have an industry. There's going to be no IMT, there's going to be no mobile industry without spectrum. As we say in the GSMA, without spectrum, we are essentially less mobile, and that is the base of our industry. 1 second, there you go. So for the 5G evolution, we see that 23 is going to be talking about 3 different fronts. We're talking about mid-band capacity, we're talking about coverage, and we're talking about digital divide. And there is, different from other conferences, we have a lot of agenda items that relate directly to us. And on top of that, we have other agenda items that are secondary to our main business, but also need attention from our side. So we're actually trying to cover a number of different issues at the same time, which has been a challenge, and it is the first time this has happened. Right now, the ITU is hosting working parties 5A, B, and C. We have priority agenda items in all those 3 working parties, and that makes our job even harder in this cycle, but also more interesting in many ways. This is what IMT agenda items look like for this cycle, for this conference. So we have Region 1 with a number of different bands being discussed, Region 2, some of them the same, some of them different, Region 3 is slightly less number of bands. But we were trying to understand in the GSMA how we position ourselves there. Some of the bands are old friends of ours, some of the bands are really new, and we wanted to hear from our members what we think about them, how we feel about the future in these bands. So we did a questionnaire with our members, and the questionnaire came back that 90% of the mobile operators see the 6425 to 7125 megahertz as high priority for use for IMT. This figure is for all 3 regions, because even though the identification seems to be in part of the band for Region 1 only, the band is allocated for mobile and could be used in all regions. And once the ecosystem is built, we also see that there is a benefit in the harmonization. So this is something that came, how can I say, as a surprise, that the 6 and 7 gigahertz band came as the highest priority from all the bands that we asked our industry how they feel about that. So I think that sets the scene for the next 3 years ahead of us. So we have the WRC 23 holding the key for the 3 familiar challenges: the harmonization. We talk about 3.5 gigahertz. We talk about new harmonized spectrum for 5G, for example, 6 gigahertz. We also talk about cost efficiency, so having sufficient channel bandwidth in 3.5 and 4.8 and 6 ensure a more cost efficient network, which means that will mean lowered network density, which also means lower prices, which also means, of course, affordability, increased affordability. And then we talk about coverage. We have citywide capacity solutions being discussed in 3 agenda items, and we have 1 agenda item for low band spectrum below 1 gigahertz, which is for Region 1 only. And if you remember, that is Region 1 actually catching up with Regions 2 and 3, who did that discussion ahead of WRC 15. So we see improving and harmonization as we go along. In terms of the 3.5 gigahertz, this is a map that we are looking to update, but this is the plans that countries had for release of IMT spectrum in the 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz band. And you see the colors there going for 200 megahertz or less to 500 megahertz or more. And we see that those maps, that the intention of the countries do not necessarily align with what's in the ITU today. Of course, the band is allocated to mobile in most regions, so they can use the band, but we understand that there is a need to catch up. The ITU catching up with what the countries have already announced they are doing, or are thinking about doing, or are consulting on doing, on releasing more 3.5 gigahertz spectrum than we thought possible at WRC 15 or at WRC 07, even back at WRC 07. We did a study last year about the cost efficiency of this band and in terms of channel size. So if you have 100 megahertz channel, you have 1 type of network. If you have 6 megahertz channel, it means a 64% increase in number of cell sizes to be able to have the same level of throughput. And that means that for global benefits, on top of those 200 megahertz 3436 that we talk as a baseline for this band, additional 300 megahertz would give savings of $50 billion, and additional 700 megahertz would give savings of $80 billion. So we see that that is very impressive on how much the networks will be different based on the channel size availability. And we see that different values per region. This is of course based on GDP. So you see the values will be higher in more developed countries and lower in developing countries, but that's because of the GDP. And then we wanted to talk a bit about the 6 gigahertz on the basis that it is a band that is split in various parts. We see a clear split on 6425 for WRC23 discussions, as you can see there, part of it global, part of it for region 1, and we see different countries planning different things. We see quite a lot of lack of harmonization at the moment, and we're hoping that this cycle will be able to drive more harmonization into this band. In terms of the timeline, we are really in the beginning of the cycle, which is luckily because of the pandemic and all the situation that we have faced this year. It means we're not getting too delayed. If the conference was this year in November, I would be panicking on how we would be able to finish WRC. So I guess that in a way that was lucky for us. That is not in line, it's not in time for WRC itself. We see that the red dot of where we are developing characteristics, spectrum needs and propagation models into the sharing studies. We have a deadline of until mid-21 for this to happen. And then between mid-21 to early 23, we see the sharing studies done, we see the CPM text developed, and then we have the final engagement between countries and regions. That means we have a long road ahead of us, and we don't have any answers right now because it's not our job to have answers right now. Now we should be focusing on doing the studies that we're asked to do, that WRC19 asked us to do. Once we have these studies on the table, we'll be able to have more answers on what to do from here. So for us, as I said, WRC23 will be able to bring harmonization, a more cost-efficient network, and also address some coverage issues that we have. And that's what we want to be discussing in these next 4 years. I didn't mention anything here about the outcome from WRC19 because of course we spent the last 4 years talking about WRC19, but we do have quite a lot of work, resulting work from WRC19 that is going on in the ITUR, and actually we still have some resulting work from WRC15 going on in ITUR. So we are still going to be talking about L-band, and we're going to still be talking about millimeter waves in terms of the technical finalization on how to use these bands, but the main job for us now is to address those bands that are in the WRC23 agenda. So with that, I conclude. I hope I haven't exceeded my 10 minutes allotted for me. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for the invitation for this seminar.
Very much. So Luciana, you did it in exactly 10 minutes. Thank you for that. I would like to call now Jennifer Mana. Jennifer is Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at EchoStar Corporation, Hughes Network Systems, where she is responsible for the company's domestic and international regulatory and policy issues, including spectrum management, 5G, IoT, and market access. Jennifer has received numerous awards, including being named one of the 100 most powerful women in media and was awarded at the EchoStar 2019 Chairman's Awards. Jennifer has served as adjunct professor at Georgetown University Law Center and has published books and articles on telecommunications issues. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Agostino, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you to the ITU and the CTU and Nigel, of course. So now I'm going to do my best to share my screen. And it may just take me a second to get this right, so I apologize. Can everyone see the slides? I'll take that as a yes. Okay, yes. Thank you. Sorry about that. So good morning. I'm here on behalf of ASOA, and our focus is really for this next WRC and the last WRC really is satellite broadband and 5G. Luciana, of course, did a great job on presenting the mobile side, and I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about how satellite fits into this ecosystem. And we have a very important role, just as mobile. And I know other speakers are going to talk about other technologies as well. So there's a lot of drivers for 5G right now, whether it's universal access to healthcare, something that we've been seeing a lot more of, unfortunately, with the pandemic, agriculture, higher security risks require us to spend more time on cybersecurity, e-government, and you know, I think the pandemic has been such a unique situation for us in that we've really seen the importance of broadband. The fact that we're all sitting here today over a Zoom call and able to share presentations and ideas on a real-time basis, I think we would have been in a really bad situation if it wasn't for the where technology is. But I do think there's a lot of issues coming forward as we look to 5G. How are we really going to make this network meet everyone's needs? And I think one of the things we're going to see is, and we're certainly seeing it here in the United States where I live, is that there's going to be more suburban and rural usage. In the Caribbean, as many of you probably know, at least one country in the Caribbean is creating a remote from work package, encouraging folks from around the world to come stay on their island and remote work because of the ability of broadband, allowing them to work anywhere in the world and still get their job done. And I think that's been a unique problem. We've also got, still have a huge digital divide. And I have to think one of the things I'm most proud of being in the satellite industry is I really do feel we're an important portion of how do we solve that digital divide, whether it's offering community Wi-Fi solutions, bringing cost-effective broadband solutions to perhaps the rural and remote areas, such as in the Amazon, and then serving as a backhaul mechanism for mobile stations, among other great things. So just wanted to share, you can kind of think of what's coming as a infrastructure public-private partnership, whether we're connecting homes, cities, things, houses. It's going to take a number of different technologies to meet all of these connectivity demands that we have. And what we're seeing is this exponential demand for connectivity. Unfortunately, I don't have this sized for the pandemic, and I think Luciana had mentioned how the mobile numbers have changed. The satellite numbers have changed dramatically, and satellite operators offering broadband, for instance, saw intense increases in the demand for activations over normal times since COVID. And so, you know, you're seeing between mobile, between satellite, between microwave, other technologies, really increased demand for connectivity. So as we head to this 5G world, what are we going to have to do? Well, I think the good news is satellites are already there. We are delivering next generation communication satellites. Satellites like my company's satellite has seeds of 25.3. There's new satellites on the horizon, Viasat-3, the NGSOs, SpaceX, OneWeb, our Jupiter 3 satellite, which will bring service to the Americas at speeds of 100 megs and more. Of course, the NGSOs are going to bring high speeds as well at lower latencies. So all of a sudden, today, when you look around, you have a large number of satellite providers who are able to provide high-speed broadcasting and media distribution, serving businesses, governments, M2M, IoT, cellular backhaul, and other things. And one of the things Luciana talked a lot about, and I agree with, is the need for the harmonization of spectrum. And this is where satellites are a little different than mobile, is we have very, very wide coverage area. So harmonized access to spectrum is incredibly important to us in order to be able to utilize the infrastructure as efficiently as possible. And similarly, we're resilient, which of course in areas of the Caribbean is incredibly important in the Americas. So just to reiterate, this is just a short chart on why we matter so much, the communications ecosystem, ubiquitous coverage. And one of the things I think is really unique on the NGSOs is when we talk about global coverage, for the first time for broadband, we'll really have global coverage. We'll be over the poles, we'll be everywhere. High speed, we've been talking about that. And of course, the reliability and resiliency of being in space. So then we get to spectrum. So, and there is a real demand for spectrum, and everyone here, I'm sure, is going to talk about how their industry, their area needs of spectrum. And the answer is, how do we get there? So we've got to balance the growth of networks and real spectrum needs. We have to be technology neutral when we think of it. It doesn't necessarily mean equal. It doesn't mean I get 100 megahertz, so GSMA and the mobile carrier should get 100 megahertz, so the high altitude platforms should get 100 megahertz, et cetera, et cetera. But it does mean that there has to be an honest evaluation, and we must recognize that there is a need for spectrum for all technologies, because no single technology is going to meet all the needs. And we have to be able to mix this in a way that we're able to serve everyone, anywhere, anytime. So this is really my attempt at a slide to say, let's mix everything. So just going over work, unlike Luciana, I just wanted to remind folks of work 19, our 3 goals. We broke the WRC into 3 categories. Agenda items was protection of our existing satellite spectrum, because there is a need for other services. So how can we share, but still make sure that we're able to operate? Study the regulatory and flexibility aspects for satellite services, and obtain new satellite spectrum. So what I have highlighted here is really some of the key areas, and not probably the highest priority areas that we looked at WRC are in red. So I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but just to remind folks. So now we get to work 2023, and Luciana's slide I really enjoyed, of laying out the framework of where we are. These are some of the items that we're keenly following. You know, once again, we've got the IMT spectrum, which Luciana talked about, which we're supportive of, but we also recognize that you've got to protect the key satellite bands. These provide important uses globally. These are harmonized, a lot of these are globally harmonized bands. You know, C-band, of course, provides important uses today around the world. Other areas, 7 gigahertz, the band Luciana mentioned, 6425 to 7125, is an important feeder link band for a number of the MSS satellites. So there's a number of important uses in those bands, and we look forward, as we're going through the study process, to working with the other industries to find a way to make sure there's adequate spectrum for everyone, but also ensuring protection of existing uses. One of my, so the other one, I don't think we have this right, 1.3, which is, we could just say FSS allocation, but I'm not sure what 1.3 is off the top of my head. That's not right, so I apologize on that. There's an identification spectrum for HIBs, which are high altitude base stations. I'm sure my colleague on the panel will touch on that. FSS use for UAS. A couple of really important items for us are the Earth stations in motion and the use of the 12 gigahertz on vessels and aircraft. That's one where we're looking at flexibility. ISLs, intersatellite links, this is an interesting issue, and it was discussed quite at length at the previous conferences. We're coming up with the Work 23 agenda item conference, and there's a recognition that you can get more efficient use out of your NGSOs if they have ISLs between satellites, but also between NGSOs and GEOs, and they're able to bring traffic down through less Earth stations. So you would require less infrastructure, saving costs. 2 important new spectrum provision agenda items. So the more MSS spectrum, and this is looking at additional spectrum for MSS below 4 gigahertz. And then there's a proposal for 200 megahertz of spectrum for FSS sharing with the broadcast satellite service. And then there's a very important item that probably everyone on the panel is involved with, is 9.1.3, which involves fixed service and IMT. And it was a very broad agenda item that was adopted near the end of the conference to look at fixed service and fixed wireless broadband. So that's one I think probably all of us are very engaged in. So we have a very, very full agenda. Satellite. So how do we get to 5G? Well, like GSMA, we need low, mid, and high band spectrum to meet all needs. We have a real need for below 3 gigahertz spectrum for critical MSS services. That's the agenda item 1.18. We use mid-band, which are critical for backhaul, media, broadcast, mobility, and then high band, which is really where our broadband and a fair amount of our mobility services today are. So when you're on airplanes, when you get to fly again, a number of the airplanes are using satellite spectrum in the high bands to provide you internet on the airplane, whether you like it or not, that's another story. So just to conclude, we really do believe spectrum needs can be met with a balanced approach. 5G is going to be a network of networks, and we need to be prepared for it. And so whatever actions we take at work really must be balanced to take into account all the different technologies. So with that, Augustino, thank you. And if I can figure out how to get out of my slides, I will. Sorry.
Thank you, Jennifer. 10 minutes as well. So thank you all to respect our time. So with this, I would like to invite Janet Kenneth from Loom. Janet has 20 years of public policy experience advocating for the information and communications technologies industry. Has represented industry and government before multilateral, federal, and local levels, ensuring that communications policies support communities and the growth of the sector. Janet joined Loom, an Alphabet company, from the First Responder Network Authority, a US federal agency that is deploying a nationwide communications network for emergency communications. Janet, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. My IT decided to just fall apart today, so Jennifer Manor was going to graciously help me try to present slides today. So I'm not sure how that was going to work exactly, but from the moderator point of view, how you could have another person present, please. But while that's getting worked out, why don't I just go ahead and start my comments. Thank you very much to the ITU and the CTU and our other panelists today. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about Loon and HAPS and how that is really supporting the ecosystem, as Jennifer mentioned. And our collaboration here today is very much appreciated just to get this presentation and panel going. Next slide, please, when it's available. So Loon, who is Loon? Loon is an independent operating agency under the Alphabet umbrella. We were a Google X project, or then Alphabet X project, until June 2018, and then we became our own separate legal operating entity under Alphabet. Thanks. Next slide, whenever that's possible.
Yeah.
So what is Loon? Loon is balloon-powered internet that operates in the stratosphere. So many of you already know where the stratosphere is, but we operate above the terrestrial networks and then below the satellites and at about the altitude of 20 kilometers. Yeah, thank you for the comment about view, but anyway, sorry, this is like life in COVID. So next slide, please. And then the next one. So here we are. You can see where we believe that the stratosphere is a new frontier for technologies. It's another tool in the toolkit to help expand connectivity. And our intention is to work with all the different technologies to just try to provide greater coverage to people. Next slide, please. And this is a shot of like what it looks like just after launch as it's heading up into the stratosphere. Next slide, please. So Loon itself is not a mobile service provider. We work with mobile network operators to provide coverage. So this is a basic diagram of how Loon works. You'll see that there's a gateway. It's very tiny, but there's a gateway station where we connect the Loon network to the network operator system, and we then provide a mesh of balloons in the stratosphere. And then we also have different terminals on land. So for our backhaul spectra, we're using E-band, and then from our balloons, we work with a mobile network operator to basically do a network extension of their network over the coverage area. And so this way, you know, similar to other technologies, we have resiliency measures and also a lot of different ways in which we can reach regular people directly on their standard LTE devices. And so in many ways, it does allow for connectivity to happen way beyond the way a traditional coverage would work. Because of the balloon links, you still need a ground station, but you can operate further away from the desired location because of the links. And so that's why, as you've probably heard in other press releases, we have been able to provide disaster communications, just not in addition to network operation expansion. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of our new balloon model. It's made of a very thin polyurethane material. It feels like almost like a plastic sandwich bag. It's that thin, but there's a lot of engineering that goes in just within the plastic itself. And what you see here is sort of the outer balloon, and inside there's actually an inner balloon. So the outer balloon is filled with helium, and the inner balloon is just filled with regular outside air. And based on the amount of regular air in the inner ballonnet, you can adjust the weight of the balloon. So if you want the balloon to rise, you reduce the amount of air inside the ballonnet, and if you want it to start dropping, you add more air to the inner ballonnet. And all of that, if you can see underneath the balloon, you'll see a picture of the payload, which will be on the next slide, please. So here's a picture of our payload. You can see it is very efficient. It uses all solar power. There's battery packs on there. There's GPS equipment to help with the navigation, and there's like radio equipment. The balloon there this is what it looks like at the launch site, where you can see the balloon is behind the gentleman setting up for launch. And so all of this is going to be carried up in the stratosphere. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Here are some of the benefits, again, of having operations in stratosphere, weather resilience, just as Jennifer mentioned with satellite, weather resiliency, power resiliency. You can deploy relatively quickly and connect direct to standard LTE devices. Next slide, please. And so as people have mentioned, or maybe have read about, we have used Loon in disaster scenarios. We did provide service in Peru as well as in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And this was provided while some of the traditional networks were being recovered. And so this provided a great solution to support connectivity while terrestrial networks were coming back online. Next slide, please. And since Hurricane Maria, I think that was a great demonstration of use cases, but also the technology. And so we have started entering commercial partnerships with Telefonica, AT&T, and most recently Telecom Kenya. And I think this growing interest in the use of Loon technology is really going to support meeting the coverage needs for the next 1.8 billion connections that Luciana cited. And even with that, it's still half of the world's people still don't have internet. So we believe that the growing use of stratospheric internet and in partnership with other technologies is really going to support the global ecosystem of connectivity. Next slide, please. Here is a new product that we have announced in May this year with AT&T. It's our disaster preparedness roaming sponsorship. So right now in the Caribbean, we work with local operators should they should they be interested in this service. And what happens is, should a network in the local area go down, we work with AT&T and the local operator to basically create like a roaming agreement in the affected area, so that it would be, you can have connectivity through a balloon. You can see here how we would deploy the network in a situation where it's needed, where we have a gateway in Puerto Rico, and then through a mesh network of balloons, we can support connectivity over a wide range of the Caribbean. And so hurricane season is coming, so we're getting ready to put this into practice. And so hopefully by the next time we talk this year, we'll be able to talk about some of our experiences with this disaster communications. Next slide, please. And that is a very overall summary of our product and our technology. And we're looking forward to really being engaged. You know, I know people felt like we were a project, but now we're a full commercial operating entity. We are joining the ITU and the CTU and other regional groups have really demonstrated our commitment to working together. We are also following particular agenda item 1.4 to promote, you know, use of new technologies and innovation, and we look forward to any questions in the group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. And now let's have our fourth speaker, Dr. Marta Suarez. Dr. Marta Suarez is president of the Dynamic Spectra Alliance and has over 15 years of experience in the telecommunications industry. She spent over 3 years as General Director of the National Spectra Agency in Colombia, ANE, having originally joined the ANE in 2013. Before that, she was involved in the Partnership for Cognitive Radio European project and worked at the ESICON Research Center, where she worked on wireless transmitter architecture. So thank you, Marta. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Agostinho, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm very pleased to be here today, and especially I'm closing a panel with only women, which is a great achievement in the region. I'm very excited about that. So let me start sharing my screen. 1 second, please. Here it is. Could you please confirm, Agostinho, if you can see?
Yes, I can.
Okay, okay, thank you. So this session is about IMT and broadband systems, and I'm going to talk the last part of the conversation about wireless LANs and Wi-Fi. So basically just a few words about the DSA. We are a global cross-industry non-for-profit organization, and basically we are promoting more efficient use of the spectrum, because we think that that is a way to get more connectivity and at the same time to enable innovation. So what is the current situation in terms of Wi-Fi? There are two aspects. The first one is that the existing Wi-Fi spectrum is already overburnt in many locations, and users experience congestion at peak busy hours. And at the same time, we also have a growing demand for more and more capacity. So our position is that it is important to dedicate more unlicensed spectrum in the mid bands. I will just start with the current situation. We are, most of us are working from home, and unfortunately we are not in the Caribbean right now, and we have to deal with a virtual conference. But what I think everyone can recognize that we have been forced to request more and more from our networks at home. So we have children taking lessons from studying from home. We also have more people working all day, plus some additional video consumption. So there is a growth in terms of demand right now. And I took this is an image from OpenSignal, and it is presented for different regions. I took the results for Americas, And basically what it's proving is that time on Wi-Fi has increased during COVID-19. So here you have some different countries that, and it's taking the average time that is spent on Wi-Fi. And the colors, you can just see in the last column, the colors indicate when the increase of traffic is more than 25%, or there are different ranges. So the basic conclusion is that in all the Americas region, the time on Wi-Fi has been increasing during these last weeks. And because of that, it's important to consider what is the future of these networks, not only in terms of traffic, but also in terms of number of devices that are accessing the networks. So in, the Wi-Fi technology has been updating. There are many cases of evolution. So if you all remember, we started with AO2.11. We had A, B, G, N, and right now we call the last generation, sorry, we call it Wi-Fi 6. So if you just look the table in the low part of my slides, you will see that we are targeting here very high data rates. So for Wi-Fi 6, one of the main advantages of the standard is that it's possible to have larger channels. So it means larger bandwidth, wider channels. And because of that, it's the same principle that we have with every technology. If you have larger bandwidth, then you can have more throughput and lower latency. So in these cases, we could expect to have about 9.6 gigabits per second for 160 megahertz channel. And that's also because the technology is very efficient in terms of spatial streams. So it's possible to handle better, more devices connected at the same time. Now, let me clarify, when we talk about the 6 gigahertz band, we are talking about 5925 to 7125. And this complete band has been dedicated in the US for unlicensed access. So you can see, let me give also some details about that decision in the US. But before going there, I would like to just compare quickly the performance that we could expect with Wi-Fi 6. So because we have wider channels, the throughput is increased. The range is about the same that we have with 5 gigahertz networks, and the latency is lower. We also have some new use cases. So I will talk a little bit about that. There are 3 main use cases. The first one is for standard power. So these are the kind of networks that we could expect in a stadium, in a university campus, or also in rural areas. So those are the devices that operate at standard power. There is a second use case that is low power indoor. That is the kind of networks that we could have at companies, enterprises, or at home. And there is a third kind of operating devices that is very low power. These devices could be used indoor and outdoors. They are providing connectivity for very short range communications, but that need a lot of capacity. So for example, this is very useful for augmented reality, virtual reality, gaming, training in manufacturing companies. And there are also a lot of use cases inside the cars. So you could have these devices connecting different, this technology connecting different devices in a car. So as I mentioned, the FCC approved the unlicensed use of the entire 6 gigahertz band. This is just to summarize. The low power indoor devices were allowed in the 1200 megahertz. Standard power devices only in 850 because there are some rules in terms to protect the incumbents in that band. And very low power is still under study. We already closed the stage in the US to provide comments, and now we are going to have a deadline for reply comments. In terms of power, we have standard power access points are operating at basically 36 dBm. Clients operate 6 dB lower. And in terms of low power indoors, we are talking about, in this case, we talk about density. So it's 5 dBm per megahertz. It means that if we have a 20 megahertz channel, the power will be 18 dBm EIRP. I would like to quickly address the economic impact of this band. So it's important to consider globally, there was a study that was finished in 2018, and it has concluded, it was targeting different regions, but basically the benefit to the economy in 2018 was 1.7 trillion euros. So we think that this is also an industry that is providing benefits, and most important, it's at the end, we are all users. So when you consider the economic impact, it's important to consider not only the contribution to GDP, but also the surplus for consumers and producers. Also, there was a study in the US, and it was estimated that between 2020 and 2025, the economic value resulting from using only VLP and LPI devices would be about 83 billion in GDP. Just a few words about WRC. So Luciana mentioned that, but I just wanted to reinforce the idea. A global harmonization is only expected in the 100 megahertz, upper 100 megahertz of the band, and only region 1 is studying the upper part of the band. So we think that the regions that had decided not to study the upper part of the band for WRC 23 have the possibility to start implementing enabling Wi-Fi 6 right now. And my conclusions here, so we think that unlicensed access to the 6 gigahertz band is the best approach, and I will give you some reasons. The first is that it makes a more efficient use of the spectrum because we are using the same band, we are protecting the incumbents, I mean, and that is also the second point. It's a way to ensure that existing incumbents can continue to thrive in the band. So all the services are important. I completely agree with Jennifer's message. 5G is about an ecosystem, a network of networks, and all the services are important and can, and in our proposal for the 6 gigahertz band, all the incumbents can coexist with the right conditions, and at the same time, we can open the band for new use cases. It's also a way to attend the growing demand for wireless capacity, taking advantage of Wi-Fi 6E, like high data rates, low latency, connected device, extended battery life of client devices, that's good for everyone, increasing network efficiency. We can also, I mean, that decision would also enable more innovation, new use cases. Benefits would be immediate because the devices are going to be available by Christmas this year in the US. And that could be also a good option for WISP, wireless internet service providers, to deploy gigabit class networks across the region. So thank you. And we'll be happy to discuss further if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Marta. So with this, we conclude the 4 very, very good presentations. I would like to congratulate the 4 panelists. I would like to say as well that we still have some open questions in the Q&A box. So I would like to ask the panelists to reply these questions directly in the box, because these questions are very specific for each presentation. Now we are trying to talk about general issues that could be replied by the 4 panelists. And if we have time, we can discuss some specific topics from each presentation. And these 4 presentations were very good because we covered maybe the hot topics that we are having now. We had IMT, we had the satellites, new technology, that is hubs, that was presented by Janet with the Loom project, and Marta presented the Wi-Fi 6E, that is very important for everyone. Everyone uses Wi-Fi as well as IMT and satellite. So with this, I would like to make a first remark and then start with the questions. My first remark is that when Luciana presented, she showed some agenda items and the specific flex bands for the IMT agenda item. And Jennifer presented other agenda items, and what we saw is that in many agenda items, we have specific bands for specific regions. This is usually in previous WRC, this was the exception. We have, let's try to say, we try to seek a worldwide harmonization. And in the end, maybe some regions decide to identify or to allocate some specific bands. But now, before the WRC, we already decided to start specific bands for specific regions. And I don't know if this is the best way forward for a World Radio Communications Conference. So I would like to keep this topic in mind, because we are going to come back to this topic. And I would like to start with other questions for all panelists. And the first question I would like to make is how do you think that the pandemic has changed how we think of broadband and its use in the future? So I would like to give the floor to the 4 panelists. This time let's start with Jennifer, and then we change the panelists that will answer for the first time. But I would like to hear from the 4 panelists their view. Jennifer, please.
Yeah, and I agree with your, thank you so much, and I very much agree with your flag about the lack of globalization at looking at spectrum at the WRC 23. I think it's a good point. But going to the pandemic, which is something which, I think has kept all of us in the communications industry so busy. And part of why it's kept, not just that we're doing our work at home or for those of us who are essential going in, but because for the first time, we're really seeing a true need across all of society. There's almost no one who wouldn't benefit or doesn't benefit if they have access to broadband today, whether it's for work, telehealth. I see my doctors online, e-government, the governments want you to do everything online, getting your driver's license renewed. We're not seeing people socially. I mean, how many of us have had Zoom happy hours? So all of a sudden, and economically. So I think what there is even for folks who've been non-adopters, and I think adoption is one of the biggest issues that we have globally, is even where you do have broadband, there's a lack of adoption, whether it's economic, people can't afford it, and you're making a choice between food and access to broadband, or it's you live in a rural area because you live in a rural area and you don't really want to be bothered by people. That kind of all changed. And so I think we really have to think about, from a policy perspective, and this isn't an ITU perspective, you have to figure out how do you get infrastructure out there that's the sorts of speeds and performance requirements that you need, of course, and that's one funding issue. But I think there's a broader issue, which is how do you keep people adopted and how do you keep people online? And I can speak best from the United States, example. And I, in the United States, the FCC chairman made asked a number of providers if we would commit to not turning people off, not charging them late fees. And even since the commitment ended June 30th, we're still I think probably almost everyone is working to make sure that you keep people online and work out payment plans, but that's not going to be sustainable over the long term. So there has to be, in my view, a new approach that's adopted, that's focused on how do we keep people who in our societies online who should be online, which is pretty much everyone, and how do you do that in a way that actually gives them service that's sufficient? And that's where I think satellite plays a critical role. There are going to be certain areas of this world that there just isn't going to be, and I think Loon plays a similar role in that regard. So I'm sorry, Jeanette, for not including you, but these sorts of aerial technologies are going to play a role in that and continue. But I think it's up to policymakers to really think about how do we assign funding or whatever else is needed to keep it there. And it's not just the service. You also have to make sure people have computers, right? Students without computers and broadband does nothing. So thank you, Augustina. That's one of, I think, the bigger things that people are grappling with.
Thank you, Jennifer. I would like to hear from other panelists.
If I can go next. For us, this was of course, a really important year in that regard. We worked with governments in all the regions trying to get access to more spectrum on an emergency basis, because we saw a large increase in use. And being at home, I also saw a large increase of use for Wi-Fi, but I also saw a large increase of use for mobile communications, and switch between them as availability allows us to do that. So this is something that for us, it was very important. We saw governments all around the world giving the spectrum on a temporary basis for this, and how to make that into a more permanent situation where there's more spectrum available for the mobile operators to be able to do this role that has been deemed so important in so many administrations. We do take the role of the satellite backhaul very seriously. There is one thing from the satellite industry, is that they cover where no one else covers. And for us, this is really important. There are places that we cannot rely on anything apart from satellite backhaul. And we do count on that very much. And we hope that Loom is going to be there, and all the HAPS situation systems are going to be there to help that area as well. We do, however, see that is only when there is no other option for backhaul, because the capacity is not great and because the price is not great either. So we need to address those two issues to be able to rely more on different technologies for backhaul. We do have a report on that I'm happy to share with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana.
Hi, this is Jeanette. I'd like to comment if that's all right. Well, thank you very much. I think you asked a very important question, which I think is an overall, even without COVID, how do we get more connectivity to people in places that may not have it, or is, the cost models aren't there. I think specifically for our Kenya announcement, it was cited that it was because of COVID that people felt like they needed to think of new and innovative ways to connect the unconnected. And it provided us a good platform to demonstrate that that Loom technology in partnership with Telecom Kenya could do that. I think what's really important is, like, there, as Luciana mentioned, there are a lot of complementary technologies out there, and how do we create regulatory scenarios and operational scenarios that do not inhibit any of these solutions from being implemented. And so, with Loon, because our business model is to work with a MNO to provide service, we've been able to work through cost modeling that makes it actually attractive to MNOs to partner with us and solve some of these connectivity issues. And so hopefully, with COVID, we'll be able to demonstrate this and make it more normalized using technologies like HAPS in coverage scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
Maybe Agostinho, can I?
For sure, Marta.
Yes, I addressed that a little bit in my presentation. I was mentioning that COVID-19 has been, it's a really hard test for everyone. Many people had to move out of the cities because just to try to be with their families. Others were not prepared to have such capacity at home. And I think it has been a very hard time for everyone. But in terms of connectivity, what I would like to highlight, especially from the connectivity at home, is the fact that traffic consumption and time on Wi-Fi has increased. So I think we hope this crisis won't last forever, but I think we also need to learn from the experience. And what we are facing now is that more people are expecting to continue working from home. More people can also expect to have more flexibility in the future in order, as Jennifer was mentioning, to be able to go anywhere for those that are able to work for like in any place. So I think not only because of the crisis, but because the way of living, this is an opportunity for everyone to take seriously, to deal seriously with the question of digital inclusion and connectivity for everyone.
Thank you very much. Good answers. So I have another questions for the panelists. From your perspective, what immediate actions in terms of spectrum management could be undertaken to increase broadband access in the Americas? And for this time, I would propose to start with Martha.
Okay. Okay. So I think one idea that might come to my mind is immediately to release more spectrum. I think many governments have been taking actions, but as we were seeing in the case of the 6 gigahertz band, the upper part of the band is not under study in region 2, and just the 100 megahertz from 7025 to 7125. So I think there is an opportunity there. I mean, many regulators can just make an advance enabling unlicensed access to that band, and that would immediately provide an opportunity for capacity for broadband and for Wi-Fi. And if I can say, just to reinforce the final thought, is that market is ready. I mean, in the US, as I mentioned before, according to the Wi-Fi Alliance estimations, there will be more than 300 million devices on the market next year. So I think that's a fast action, and I think that will benefit everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. The other panelists, please.
If I may, Agostinho. I do agree with Marta. We do agree that releasing spectrum is key, and we do advocate that a lot. We believe that without additional spectrum, it will be very difficult to meet the demand for broadband. We do have a serious concern with the 6 gigahertz band. We do have two serious concerns with the 6 gigahertz band. The first one is that we do not agree with GSA analysis that because it's outside the agenda, there is no interest for IMT. The band is allocated to the mobile service and could be used for IMT in the same way that it could be used for Wi-Fi. So that is something that we do not agree. I would also highlight that there was 2 agenda items for additional Wi-Fi spectrum in 2015 and 19 that resulted in no additional Wi-Fi spectrum. So it's not because it's not part of the agenda that it's not there. But the most important point for us is the backhaul. That's right now a concern for the mobile industry. We do use this band, the 6 gigahertz band, intensively for backhaul right now, and releasing it for Wi-Fi causes concerns to us. We need to understand under which sharing scenario and if the backhaul will be protected. We have concerns based on previous experience with Wi-Fi bands that other terrestrial systems had to leave the band because there was no sharing that was possible in that case. And this is something that for us really needs to be addressed. Just because the band is allocated for mobile, it's not ready to go and be used for Wi-Fi. We need to address all those concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Agostinho,
please.
thank you. So I'm not going to disagree about more spectrum being made available. I think many of us will there. You know, I do want to comment on one thing. I actually think our region has been incredible on continuing work, and I'm going to single out Anatel for a second. I think just this past 2 weeks, I've seen 4 or 5 major consultations, including on spectrum, released by Anatel. I can certainly, you know, there's a major satellite consultation going on in Mexico. I know that there's many other countries that are also doing things. So it's just that I'm working on the Brazilian one, so I can specifically. So I do want to applaud, and Trinidad and Tobago was actually the first country, our host country here, was the first country I had first government I had a Zoom meeting with before my own government. So, you know, I think the region overall has been great at adapting. I think my bigger concern is that we move too fast on making spectrum available without looking at the different sharing constraints and really making sure that the services can share and be protected. So for instance, the US is looking at the E-band right now, which for those of you who don't know is a very high band, 70, 80, 90 gigahertz, and making that available for, more available for fixed service, which we certainly support, as well as mobility applications. But it's a band that the satellite industry is looking to for gateways in the future, so we can have additional capacity so we can meet the demands. I do want to say we've seen tremendous demand throughout the Americas, which is our primary market, on broadband, including for community Wi-Fi, which has been a very, very successful product during the COVID, where people who don't have broadband in home can get access fairly easily and inexpensively. But my concern is that you start moving forward with these other bands very quickly because you want to make new capacity available, and you don't think about how to protect. And I can't say it's existing services. The band's allocated to the fixed satellite service, but it's not used today by the fixed satellite service because we've just developed the technology in which we can access it. And in space, things are very hard, as you can imagine. So as opposed to perhaps a 1 to 2 year technology turnaround time that we see with terrestrial, in space, it takes more years. It's just a hard environment. We can't go up and fix things as easily or at all, I should say. So this is something that is of concern. So one of my things is, I think, yes, move fast, but also take into account the impact that certain decisions will have. And we are also happy to see some innovative things coming up. I know in the Anatel strategic plan, there's talk about mobile satellite service with a complementary ground component, moving that forward. That'll certainly help. So anyway, we appreciate everyone and all the regulators have been doing to work with us during this important time. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Janet, please.
Thank you very much for asking the question. And, you know, add a fourth spectrum. I don't think that need will ever go away. And in regards to spectrum, you know, I think as Luciana and Jennifer and Marie has also mentioned, you know, it's channel, you know, channel bandwidth, cost effectiveness, and the availability harmonization is all really important for us. So for us, in addition, you know, regulatory flexibility is also very important, you know, making sure that as we try to deploy technologies, that maybe we use some of the lessons from this COVID crisis to go into operations. And see what benefits can result from there. The one thing that I did not talk about in my presentation is Loon has also developed software-defined networking technology that we designed specifically for aerospace networks, and combined with some of the millimeter wave characteristics that we use in E-band, but also using some of these network orchestration technologies, I think that would really support helping the Americas get more access to broadband and other capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I have another question that it can be adapted for each sector. So I would like to know from the panelists, if, in your opinion, WRC is a key to the future of your industry. So for Luciana, is WRC a key for the future of mobile industry, and why? For Marta, for the Wi-Fi. For Jennifer, is WRC 23 a key to the future of the satellite industry? And Janet, I would like to know from your perspective, if WRC 23 is a key to the future of the Loon project. So of these, I would like to start with Luciana. Luciana, please.
Thank you, Agostinho. Yes, the answer for us is yes. We have invested for many years into the WRC cycles. We believe that harmonization, achieving as much harmonization as possible, is key. I think the first generation of mobile networks, when you needed a different phone to go through Europe, showed us that that's not feasible, that's not a good solution, and harmonization is part of the success of the mobile industry. And the only way to achieve harmonization, international harmonization, is through an international body. We could achieve regional harmonization, but the ITU does represent the possibility of going a lot wider. And harmonization brings economies of scale and brings roaming, all the things that the mobile industry believes it's really important. You did ask first in your remarks post our presentations about the division per regions in the agenda items. We find that difficult. We would rather it was global, because harmonization for us is very important. We have learned, however, that we start, for example, in the C-band, we started in 2007 with 200 megahertz in some countries, and then in 2015 we expanded more than 200 expanded countries. So WRC per WRC, we can increase harmonization, but we believe that the results of the WRC cause a major impact in our industry. That's why we have invested it so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So Jennifer, please.
Happy to go next. So I agree with Luciana so much, like we always do. Certainly the harmonization is critical. We think, the satellite industry has always consistently been extremely active in the WRC process because our systems are inherently global, or at least regional in nature. And just because the coverage and the way space works. So fully agree with Luciana on the harmonization. This year, we also have some really critical items on digital spectrum. Once again, those, unfortunately for us, are largely regional. And I share Luciana's concern on harmonization, but at the same point, it's a start. Some of those, at least on the more MSS agenda item 1.18, are interesting because there may be additional allocations in the other regions, and some of them are to increase and get us closer to global harmonization. So I think that's good. Flexibility continues to be an important world for us as well. Our ESIMs, or Earth Station Motion, which is Earth stations on airplanes and vessels, is continuing for NGSOs and for other bands, and that continues to be something that we see a lot of demand in. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about protection of the spectrum. A number of the bands that are identified or are being considered for identification for IMT, of course, are bands where we have satellite service in. We certainly want to find a way to work with the mobile community to make sure that we both have sufficient spectrum, as well as other communities. Yes, very important, and agree with your points earlier on the lack of harmonization at this conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Marta, please.
Thank you, Agostinho. So this time I would just like to mention something. I think harmonization, I completely agree, is important. And that's because there is so much effort when we are creating the agenda for the next conference to try to get, as you were saying, all the regions together so they can try to get a harmonized solution. And then after each region can decide, or each country can decide on what to implement or not. So I wanted also to highlight something else. Your question is, how is it important for the mobile industry? I think it's important to get better harmonization, but I also want to give a message to all the regulators that are joining this session. I think it's not only about identifying IMT spectrum. That is important, but there is a lot of spectrum that was already identified before WRC 19. That is not millimeter waves, but has been in other frequency bands. And now after WRC 19, there is also a lot of spectrum that has been identified for IMT in millimeter waves. So I think right now, if I might say, it's not only about identifying a spectrum, it's about assigning and using that spectrum. Because what we are seeing in the reality is that it's taking a long time between the time that you get IMT identification. Not always it's because you need to clean the band. Unfortunately, in many countries, the bands are ready. And it's just the time that it takes to prepare the process, to auction, and to give the spectrum to the user, to the MNOs, and then they can deploy their networks. So if I might say, I think that's something, especially in the region, that is really missing. And I think we are focused on identifying. That's fine, that's what we have been doing for many years in the past years. But I think right now it's also about trying to get solutions immediately. The bands that have been already identified, they could be assigned immediately, and they haven't.
Thank you.
Sorry,
okay.
I just want to answer one question in the chat, if you allow me to.
Okay.
Yes.
Please.
I had two people that commented about the fixed link. They were asking me, how does it work when you have unlicensed access? So I wanted to explain, there are 3 operating classes: very low power devices and low power indoor devices. There have been studies for the last 3 years. Those have been very much studied frequency bands in the US and Europe. And coexistence is possible because they are very low power or they operate only indoors. The coexistence issue is only for standard power devices because they have outdoors operation and higher power levels. 36 dBm. That is not really that high compared to other technologies. So in those cases, you need to use, what the US decided is to use a database, but that would be only for that operating class. The other two operating classes could be adopted in the very short term, immediately, and even it could be interference to the incumbents. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Janet, please, would like to hear from you regarding the RRS 3 being key for the future of Loom and hubs.
Yes, thank you very much. I think not just the WRC, but the ITU in general, I think is an enabler for industry and technology. You know, Loon, as soon as it became a independent commercializing entity, you know, we joined the ITU right away because we recognized if we wanted to have meaningful participation around the world, that, you know, participating in this forum and the platform before all of the regulators and the administrations is really key to becoming, you know, an entity that could achieve our scale and our goals as well. So yes, you know, the questions of spectrum, the questions of regulatory efficiency and harmonization, all of those are very important for the success of not just Loon, but all technologies that are able to coexist with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will still have 8 minutes to conclude our panel. So I would like to give the floor again for the panelists for a final remark with maximum of 2 minutes each. So let's start, let's see, Janet, you can be the first, please.
Excuse me, Agostinho, this is
Nigel.
Yes. In their closing, they could also take the opportunity to address any questions in the Q&A that might be.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, Janet, please, your final remarks, and if you could join your final remark with some Q&A that is still open in the box.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just reviewing the Q&A box. So, quick question on, I think it was the HAPS definition and how we are. So, Loon is what I didn't get into with our the ability for the balloon. We are actually able to provide relatively fixed location. We use, the wind patterns at different elevations vary. So if we go, when I talked about going up and down in the stratosphere, we can maintain our location by using the winds. It's a very energy efficient way to do so. So we are actually able to remain and provide service in a consistent area. And our balloons have been in air for up to like 223 days. Is a public number that's been recorded. So, you know, the balloon, these are not just like sort of party balloons that go over and fly away, and they don't, we can actually have some ability to ensure that they provide consistent service. And as far as some of the interference issues, we are also with, as I mentioned in my comments, with SDN, the software-defined network technology, and millimeter wave, you know, we can adequately provide. We just need the working on some of the studies and tests to show that more publicly, but we've been able to mitigate interference that way. But in short and in conclusion, thank you very much for this seminar. It's been really great to be on this panel with my colleagues here, and we look forward to working more with the CTU and the ITU post-conference, and look forward to this seminar again next time, hopefully in person.
Thank you, Janet. Marta, please.
Thank you very much, Agostinho, and ITU for organizing this event, and CTU for the invite. It has been a pleasure. And I would just like to say that this is an open conversation. And as regulators, I've been there, I know how hard it is. So I think you just need to make sure that you get all the pieces of the information, that you can consider all the technologies and try to create the right conditions for all the technologies to coexist and to provide the most that they can offer to the citizens. So happy to continue also the conversation in the long term, everyone here. And thank you again for this invite.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you, Augustino, and thank you again for this panel of women, so you could be our man. And I do want to say it's actually nice. It's very fitting, since you were the person who I think was one of the leaders at the WRC in having our resolution on quality at the ITU move forward. So thank you. So I think it makes sense that you're on a panel. All of us, especially with Luciana and I, who of course have been the co-chairs of the Network of Women. So, and thank you to the CTU and the ITU. I think this is very, very timely. And I think it's even more timely because of what we've seen with the pandemic. It is critical. You know, we're in a different world. No one's really talked about this. Luciana touched on it slightly, but our work at the ITU has changed incredibly much. I mean, some of the people, all the people on the panel are some of my dearest friends and colleagues who I get to work with. And, you know, it was so nice to see everyone's faces this morning, because we just don't get that in-person time. So conversations like this really remind us the only way we're going to get through some of our discussions on spectrum and how to best use it and how to best share the spectrum and advance the needs of all our companies and governments is to really sit down and move forward. So I think this was an important framework. You know, we're heading into really the next season or the next session of ITU working party meetings. And unfortunately, they're going to be remote. And so I think having these additional forums to be able to talk and hear each other's views are critical. We have really difficult decisions to make at this WRC, as we do at every WRC. But I think the need is even more so now, as we've seen with increased usage across all of our industries during the pandemic. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing you all hopefully not too long in person.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So Luciana, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Agostinho. And yes, I would join Jennifer in thanking you for your support during WRC for the Network of Women and the declaration we finally had signed, and we're looking forward to this next cycle, increasing this program within the ITU. Yeah, it has been really great participating in this panel for us. This holds the key, as you asked, to future of 5G. We see that the next session is on 5G spectrum pricing. So the matter of releasing more spectrum for mobile, for IMT, it's really important to us. My colleague Lucas will be taking part in that panel, because that is part. But we cannot just look at now. We also need to plan for the future, and we also need to look for the future. We calculate between 10 years of an ITU identification and the implementation, the real implementation of networks, and we see that with various bands. And for us, it's important to do something now, so we can have that spectrum, we can have the use in maybe 10 years time, maybe sooner. It depends. It has happened differently with different bands. So for us, this is really important. I just wanted to say to Nigel that my first CTU meeting ever was an ITU RRS in Tobago many years ago. So Nigel, it's on you. We're hoping you'll be able to host us in Tobago sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana. So thanks you all for your comments. This panel was really great. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And I think that the audience did as well. And with this, I would like to give it back to Nigel to close this panel. And thank you very much, Nigel, for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agostinho, and all the panelists indeed. We appreciate it very much. And Agostinho, I think thanks too for keeping us on time. We are about to take our break, but while we do so, I know being a panelist requires your attention. So during the break, which would be like for about 15 minutes, we will leave the Q&A would be available, so that if any of the panelists want to go in there and type in any answers to any specific questions, we would appreciate that as well. But I think what I took away from this panel is that there are certainly a lot of needs in terms of spectrum demand to be balanced. And each of the presenters, I think, adequately presented their requirements and their need for accommodating their requirements, and the challenges for the regulators to, basically find the right balance, really, and in being guided by the sharing studies as well, to take positions, viable positions to the next WRC. So we look forward, in fact, to the whole process in the run-up to WRC 23, and I think the objective would be to strive for appropriate balance among all the demands. So I'd like to close then our first session for this morning on IMT and broadband systems, and invite you to join us in about 15 minutes. We have our scheduled start time of 10:45 a.m. Eastern Caribbean time, which is UTC -4, and we'll be looking at spectrum pricing. Actually, the agenda says 5G spectrum pricing, but we'll be talking a little more generally than just 5G during the session. So I invite you there. I have the honor of moderating that particular session. So do enjoy a little comfort break. I mentioned we can ask the panelists to see if there's anything they want to address by typing answers into the Q&A. Thank you. So we'll take a break now, and back in 15 minutes. Yes, good morning again, everyone. This is Nigel Casimir at the CTU, and moving into the second session, the second panel session of our seminar today, where we'll be looking at spectrum pricing. We have 4 panelists scheduled. The first is Mr. Julian Gomez, Chief of the Consulting Division of Tachyon. We'll be hearing as well from Mr. Lindell McDonald, who is the Manager of Telecommunication Systems at the Spectra Management Authority of Jamaica. We'll also be hearing from Mr. Lucas Galito. He is the Public Policy Director for Latin America and the Caribbean for GSMA. We saw his colleague just now, Luciana Camargos. And we'll also be hearing from Marisliana Mendes, who is the Secretary General at ASIET, which is the Inter-American Telecommunications Organization for telecom operators. I'll be moderating. CTU telecom specialist, and probably just to set the stage a little for the panel discussions that we'll be having. CTU is hosting, so we got a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Privilege, I suppose. Also to give some perspective on the Caribbean aspect of this spectrum pricing topic. We are interested in more than just 5G pricing, because we've found that there are issues for us with our legacy pricing systems and regimes with broadband, some of these new and emerging broadband services. So we heard about Loon in the previous panel. And for Loon to operate in our territories, they need spectrum, of course. The newfangled satellite services that are coming out, which are broadband in nature, they would need also to have spectrum assignments. And at the local level, the local regulators need to be able to navigate themselves through their licensing systems to assign spectrum to individual users. And we've had feedback at the CTU from our members, our members in the Caribbean, that their legacy pricing systems are inadequate for this purpose. And the CTU has been working with our members in our spectrum management task force, which is a multi-stakeholder group of regulators, operators, academia, and other stakeholders around the Caribbean, to address harmonization generally. And also, I'll just put on, let me just share my slide a second here. I'm hoping that you're able to see this, this particular slide, where we talk about, I'm going to be addressing spectrum pricing recommendations that emerged from our spectrum management task force over the past few years. There was a specific project we call the Harmonized Caribbean Spectrum Planning and Management Project that ran from 2013 to 2016 with funding out of the IDB and Compete Caribbean. The objective was to deepen the harmonization of spectrum planning and management policies and practices across the region. One key product of this project was the Caribbean Spectrum Management Strategic Plan 2016 to 2018. And this strategic plan articulated a vision for spectrum management in the Caribbean. There was a mission statement, guiding principles, and it proposed policies and strategies on spectrum pricing, frequency allocation tables, cross-border interference, and digital switchover. Earlier in the week, I highlighted what came out of our digital switchover aspect. And for this panel, I'd like to just present on one slide what came out of our spectrum pricing policies and strategies. And the policies on the left-hand side of this table, basically, it was agreed that the common pricing policy should recover the full cost of spectrum management activities by spectrum management authorities from all authorized spectrum users, that spectrum should be allocated to the highest value use demand, and in determining that highest value use, the national developmental strategy should be considered in determining what's the, where there are competing demands, how should we balance the allocation, or should I say the assignment of spectrum to specific uses. And the fourth policy area that we agreed was that spectrum pricing should be guided by best practices, including fairness, objectivity, and so on. Realizing that there was a need for harmonization or acceptance of these policy principles throughout the Caribbean, the strategies identified were, well, we certainly would require some reform, and we might need to appoint a champion. We need to undertake legislative reform in some cases, engage with relevant stakeholders, and also develop different evaluation procedures for us to make the decisions appropriately. So nothing too extraordinary in terms of the policies put forward, but it certainly would require some evolutionary changes in the way that we manage spectrum in the Caribbean. In addition, for coming up with new pricing models for the new and emerging services, we need to follow these principles in deriving the new pricing methods. So we in the Caribbean are interested, yes, 5G pricing certainly is among the things, but the other pricing challenges are also relevant to us. So we'll be interested. Oh, and one last thing I should mention is that in the small markets of the Caribbean, it's not always viable to undertake spectrum auctions. And these are the kinds of challenges and things that we have to think through in terms of deciding on assignments and pricings for spectrum. So with that kind of general Caribbean background, I would now, just give me a second here. Yes, with that kind of Caribbean background, I'd now like to invite our panelists to make their presentations, which should be for about 10 minutes each before we get into general discussion. And first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Julian Gomez. Julian Gomez Pineda is his full name. He's a Colombian national physicist and electrical engineer. He's a founding partner of Tachyon Consultants, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I suppose he'll correct me if I'm wrong. He has over 25 years of management and consulting experience in information technology and telecommunications. Recently, he has advised governments, regulatory authorities, and private companies in more than 70 consulting projects in 22 countries in the Americas, Europe, and Africa, including topics in public policy, technical and economic regulation, spectrum management, and spectrum valuation. And he has also been a lecturer on these topics, and he's worked for international organizations such as the ITU, the World Bank, the IDB, and the Latin American Development Bank, CAF, and others. And I think one of the 22 countries he worked in was Trinidad and Tobago for the Telecoms Authority. So I would like to invite Julian now to make his presentation, please. Julian, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nigel. Good morning. Let me share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, I hope you are looking at my screen now.
Yes, we are.
Good. So, regarding the general principles to determine the value of the spectrum, the conventional wisdom say that the final spectrum value should be decided by the market, and the ideal way to get this valuation is in a competitive process. In this way, we can get the highest value use, and in this kind of process, the determination of a reserve price is needed. However, when we have bids regarding the governing spectrum, the bids volume in the auctions are influenced by many factors like the allocation mechanism rules, for example, the number of licenses, by the nature of the property rights, it is the duration of the license, and the post-auction rules like if trading of the spectrum is permitted or not. So there are many issues that has impact on the determination of the price and the evaluation of the spectrum. Even we want to speak in a general way regarding the case of 5G that is expected is that it will be using mostly the 3.5 gigahertz band, and in the millimetric wave bands, the range of 26-28 gigahertz band. So what are the challenges for 5G spectrum pricing in particular, but most of, or at least some of these challenges are extended to other kind of bands? Well, the first problem is what is the business case for 5G? 5G may enable a variety of new use cases, and if the costs are favorable, viable business models eventually emerge, then it will be reality. The ITU has identified a set of at least 3 broad application types. One is the enhanced mobile broadband, EMBB. The second is the massive machine type communications, MTC. And the third one, the ultra reliable and low latency communications, URLLC. But each of these 3 usage scenarios require different sets of performance features. Physically, the infrastructure in its 5G network implementation is not exactly the same. For example, EMBV looks for peak data rates very high, 10 to 20 gigabits per second. MMTC is most think to support high density of devices, in theory millions of devices per square kilometer. And URLLC is looking to provide ultra-responsive connections. So we have three different cases, three different scenarios, which are different in the implementation. However, you need to wonder when you think in the business case, if this could be a reality or not, and in what extent in low and middle income countries and in small countries. 5G technology is costly because it needs densification, so it is far more capital intensive than other kind of technologies. If you look for the appetite of the private sector for these 5G technologies, there are concerns shown even from the operator side and also from the vertical sectors that might employ 5G technologies in industrial applications. In fact, there are competitive technologies and there are robust working systems already working using today's technologies. So in the case of our countries in Latin America and Caribbean countries, exploiting the apparent economical potential of 5G mobile cellular networks is at least unclear. But there are expectations if these will help to accelerate the moves to a digital economy. But sound evidence is not yet available. Then this is the key question with the 5G, and is at what extent will be the 5G case working, and what will be the 5G strategy for developing countries and application types. If we want to go beyond 5G, as Nigel is asking to us, the other technologies that we are expecting to help to improve the broadband developments also will have similar problems. I mean, to get the sound business cases it could be difficult. Possibly in the big cities, it will be a business case for that, but it's more difficult in rural areas. And in fact, in the case of 5G, not rural areas will be deployed with this kind of technology. This technology will not think in that way. There are also some challenges of 5G spectrum pricing. One is, what will be the future, as the operators will be looking into the classical innovator dilemma. Are they going to take this technology as an evolution or a revolution? For an evolution, I mean, when you look in the major difference between 5G and 4G, then you have higher data rate, higher traffic density, higher reliability, lower latency. But these capabilities can be considered mostly as largely evolutionary from the existing technologies. And in that case, the operators could serve possibly the demand for higher data rates in an incremental way, particularly in high density areas, cities with high density areas, and when demand became manifest. So in that case, we have an evolutionary race and not this kind of revolution in which 5G will be helping to serve a wide range of industry verticals, I don't know, such as automotive, public transport, media, entertainment, smart cities, financial services, energy utilities, and so on. So this revolutionary versus these evolutionary alternatives means that the evaluation should be very different. But it will also depend if there is a market there and if there is a business case there. So this is part of the key question of how disruptive is 5G. So then it will depend It will depend on the national approach and in the kind of business case that you want to develop. So I'm trying to ask the question about what are the approaches that you can use for reserve prices. Well, in general, and it will apply to any band, there is always the possibility to use an international benchmark comparison. However, in the small countries of the Caribbean, it is difficult to apply a benchmark because it's difficult to find countries which are similar. In the case of 5G, there are around 15 countries with the public information of auction results, at least in the 3.5 gigahertz band between 2016 and 2020. It includes the information of around 70 different assignments of the spectrum in the band, national and regional assignments. But most of the information is from Europe and Asia Pacific region. And when you look in the prices, you see that there is a price formation process because there is a hype around the technology and there are doubts about how disruptive will be or not the technology and the business case implied. So these prices are still in a formation process. And the alternative is, because as I said at the beginning, if you have an asset like the spectrum and you want to get the highest value use, as Nigel explained before, you need to try to determine what is the value of the asset. So an alternative is to use a discounted cash flow. It will work with 5G or with other broadband technologies. Of course, in the case of 5G, the uncertainty in the business case revenue model is an issue. In the case of low and middle income countries, possibly the best alternative is to try to look first in the EMBV part of the business case as the dominant case in the next coming years. Try to go to the other alternatives of the business case. Could be risky and could increase the expected value of the spectrum with a solid business case behind. For example, for massive machine type communications, there are many competitive technologies which are already in the market. Some of them using free spectrum, I mean, no, sorry, I forgot the word in English. And for the case of the ultra reliable and low latency communication, the point here is that this kind of vertical integrated industries in our countries possibly will arise only in some cities and in small quantity. So it looks like if you want to try to understand what is the reserve price, if you need that, then it's better to be conservative in the approach of the business case. Also, it is a good idea, I think, makes sense. Try to think that this 5G density of base station coverage and short range are oriented better in major cities with high population density. So, as I said previously, it doesn't make any sense to think this solution for rural or dispersed areas. And how will be the evolution of this 5G in low and middle income countries? I think that the operators try to serve the demand for higher data rates in an incremental way, not in a revolutionary way. That's basically my idea, Nigel, and thank you to the ITU for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Julian. I think that is a good start for us to look at for the discussions. We'll bring now a Caribbean perspective to the issue. The next speaker is Mr. Lindell McDonald, who is the Manager of Telecommunication Systems at the Spectra Management Authority in Jamaica. Jamaica is one of the administrations in the Caribbean that has a specific agency dealing with spectrum management. and Lindell is there. And I would say I've seen a bit of revitalization in their operations in the last year or two. And Lindell is part of that revitalized operation. And he'll be talking to us about, well, we've recently seen Jamaica put out a consultation document related to proposals for changing their spectrum pricing algorithms or levels, certainly. So I'll ask Lindell now to take the floor and give us the Jamaican perspective. Lindell, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me?
I'm barely hearing you. I don't know if you need to get closer to the mic or speak louder.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Is that better?
It's slightly better, but still not ideal.
Oh, all right.
Probably just speak up and project, and it'll.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Good morning. Let me say good morning to everyone, and thanks to the ITU and the CTU for enabling us to share what's happening in our side of the country. My task today would be to share with us what has been or what is happening in the Jamaican space. We have recently embarked on an exercise to do some pricing reviews of our current fee structure. I trust you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. All right. So just to share with everyone what has been our approach to our pricing policy review. This is against the background that here in Jamaica we have legislative framework that dates back to the 70s, and there has been several technology changes and market changes, and we think that we would need to have our price in keeping with the current realities. As I imagine we're all able to appreciate that the purpose of pricing would be to efficiently allocate scarce productive resources to the best uses across various industry. And when we embarked on this pricing review, we set out as some local objectives that we would want to be able to identify the true market value of the spectrum being used in Jamaica, and to find some mechanism to not just determine the price, but to incentivize spectrum use. And all of this work will make its way into the official pricing policy, which will be supported by legislation. So the general approach of this new pricing structure pretty much involved a comprehensive review of all of our existing prices, and to also look at what obtains in the jurisdictions overseas, and to see what data we could find to do some benchmarking. And for this exercise, we have leaned more heavily on data from the US, from the UK, and from some parts of the Caribbean, in particular Bahamas. I must say though, that data is not really abundantly available, and so this was a challenge of this exercise. But nonetheless, where we could, we did apply international best practices approach to arriving at the fee determination. So the bands which were marked for review are bands associated with the mobile services: 700, 850, 900, 1800, 1900, and AWS spectrum, and also spectrum associated with fixed point-to-point, also point-to-multipoint, and fixed satellite services in the C-band, KU, and the KA band. In terms of our approach to mobile pricing, we looked at some 62 countries worldwide, and we pulled data from the policy tracker database. And so we looked at some 62 countries worldwide. Also, we embarked on looking at country-specific economic and demographic data from the World Bank indicators and the Economic Intelligence Unit database, where data was available. And after putting all that data together, we then sought to convert all the prices into a 15-year equivalent license tenure to make that in line with what we do here in Jamaica. And then applying various international best practices, such as accounting for current differences for things like inflations and other different factors of geography and so on, were done to ensure that the prices would somewhat mirror the Jamaican market conditions. We also accounted for levels of affluence by using GDP per capita, again, based on data available from the World Bank database. Further to that, we looked at change in market circumstances, and we took a decision to exclude auction data which would span beyond 10 years. The thinking there is that we would have had several market and other changes in technology where that data might not be useful. So we took a decision to set aside data older than 10 years. And then we analyze all prices on a per megahertz per capita basis, and other per megahertz per unit of GDP per capita, PPP, so that we could compare results across jurisdictions. And so after all that analysis, what we found when we looked at the access spectrum for the various bands, we found that there are some trade-offs. For some bands, we would have marked reductions, and for some, there would be increase. For instance, we found that the largest increase would be associated with the AWS spectrum bands, where we saw that users would be required to pay 13.8% more than what they would currently pay. But certainly for the other bands, there were marked reductions, as much as 37% and this is based on what would be current requirements in terms of what operators would be asked to pay. But let me hasten to say that this is a exercise in process as we speak, so it's not yet finalized. This is just our approach to the review, and the direction here is that it would not affect the providers immediately, but it would only be impacting on incumbent service providers, or certainly if licenses are up for renewal, then at that stage, then the new rates may kick in. All right, in terms of point-to-point spectrum, the approach there was to look back at our algorithm, because for point-to-point, there is an algorithm that pretty much has several factors which when put together with the various values, would help us to arrive at the price for various links. And so here we reviewed the algorithm, and we identified existing and alternative uses for the various bands. And here in Jamaica, our fixed point-to-point links range from 2.3 gigahertz to 23 gigahertz. We also had to arrive at a reference rate for the band, and then make some adjustments to the factors in keeping with the realities of the current conditions and the various analyses which I hinted at earlier, which we would have done for the mobile spectrum. And so in terms of the data available, we saw where, again, based on auction data, and our approach here is to lean heavily on auction data, but we would certainly do some cross-checking based on studies available from other jurisdictions. And in terms of what we found, based on a price per megahertz per pop in the Asian Pacific region for which data was available, also in the USA and Europe, we found that there were some, disparities between what the spectrum was perceived to be valued for various bands, like the 4.9, the 24 gigahertz, and the 26 gigahertz. Now, this is what our algorithm looks like for the point-to-point. And so there's a base fee, and we have a product relationship with the various factors in order to arrive at the actual price. And of course, that's a function of the number of years. Now, in setting the base fee, in terms of consideration, which we had to give in order to ensure that the factors were reflective of true market value, we looked at estimated value for alternative use, and also we looked at estimate provided by regulators in other jurisdictions. We also looked at transitioning to a base fee on a per megahertz basis that is more consistent with small and large users. And of course, this was against the background of what obtained currently, where we had a price of $100,000 per megahertz for a 1 megahertz bandwidth, in comparison to paying less when the bandwidth request is greater. And so we sought to add two factors to the current algorithm, and the two factors are, one, an efficiency factor, and also a factor that accounts for inflation, so as to ensure that the use of the spectrum is incentivized. And based on all those ideas put together, we were able to arrive at changes for the current algorithm. I am going to try to see if I can pull up the algorithm for point-to-point, just to show you what it looks like. I hope you are able to see it. So in terms of or two factors. So at the bottom here, notice when we had the current arrangement, again, the frequency band factors, the zone factor, the network factor, and so on. So some values remained unchanged. Some values were, again, modified slightly in keeping with our current realities. Like, for instance, we would have made changes to the network factor, and we would have also added the efficiency factor, and of course a factor for inflation. And the inflation data would be pulled from our national institute that's responsible for inflation data, and this of course will be pinned to the consumer price index.
Your time.
Yes, thank you. All right. So in terms of the outcome then for point-to-point, what we saw is that when we consider the weighted average of 198 samples, this is pulled from the actual database, live data placed in motion to see what it would amount to, we're seeing that there would be a 17% reduction. And this is for the commercial operators. And for private, we're seeing that there would be a 16%, a 16% reduction. Similar argument for point to multipoint, where again, we looked at available data, available in the different regions, Asia Pacific, USA in particular, the wider Americas region and Europe. And we were able to, based on these values, apply the various best practices approaches, and we were able to arrive at changes to our formula. So here the point-to-point, multipoint, the point-to-multipoint formula is pretty similar to what we have for point-to-point. And a similar approach there in adjusting the factors where possible in keeping with our current realities, and also adding the efficiency factor and the inflation factor. What we saw for point-to-multipoint in terms of what the prices would amount to be is that, again, it would be a trade-off. We saw that there would be increases for some and reductions for others. But this is all in an effort to ensure that spectrum is used efficiently and that there is some incentives for using the spectrum. With respect to fixed satellite services, we had fixed costs, based on each station, and we thought that we would move from a fixed per terminal fee to a two-tiered system, again, to incentivize the market. So we have here a two-tiered system, depending on how many terminals, and also depending on the use. So considerations in terms of discounts will be certainly provided to specialist target groups like hospitals, youth clubs, and health centers, school libraries, and so on. And the idea here is to make things more attractive for providers, with the hope that the market can be more active. So in conclusion, the idea here is that we're hoping that we can satisfy the economic and social objectives and encourage spectrum use and innovation, and certainly attract additional investors. And overarching approach there is to ensure that spectrum is used efficiently. This concludes my presentation. Thank
you very much, Lindell. I think that gives us a very good local perspective on, the challenges that regulators are facing. It's good to see Jamaica looking to put in place specific principles, which I think can serve you in good stead as the demands evolve towards 5G and other broadband services. So I think there's some good fodder there for discussion and questioning. So we'll move on now to the next speaker, Mr. Lucas Galito. Let me just introduce him properly for us. 1 second. Yes, Lucas is with the GSMA. He is Public Policy Director for Latin America, and he's responsible for developing, adapting, and executing GSMA's advocacy activities in the region, including securing critical spectrum resources for mobile, promoting best practice in areas such as regulation, taxation, security, and privacy, as well as fostering digital empowerment for citizens. Of course, he represents GSMA in international forums and meetings like this one, and he has over 15 years experience in the telecoms industry. And prior to joining GSMA, he held different management positions in high-tech companies such as Ericsson, Nokia, and the satellite industry. So I'll ask Lucas now to make his presentation. Lucas, go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nigel. Can you see my screen? Can you hear me well?
Yes, both.
Super. Thank you, and thank you to CTU and the ITU for inviting GSMA and myself to join this this session, this panel. So I'll try to be brief. So as you may know, as you may have heard, 5G needs more spectrum across 3 different bands. The low bands to support widespread coverage across urban, suburban, and rural areas. Mid bands that offers a good mixture of coverage and capacity benefits, and high bands to support the ultra high broadband speeds that envisions 5G. And this is just like a reminder, you know, to start driving this session. So when it comes to how to set the stage for world-class 5G, well, there are different things that we are considering, and of course, spectrum pricing is one of those. And that's why I'm bringing this to the attention, because we have done a lot of work as GSMA when it comes to a spectrum pricing. This is a topic of interest in the last years for us. So when it comes to the impact of high spectrum prices, well, the GSMA has consistently encouraged policymakers to be genuine leaders and choose the path of digital economies, prosperities, and connectivity for the LATAM region and the Caribbean region by sacrificing immediate and short-term financial gains of higher prices in exchange of much higher growth potential and ultimately revenue down the line. So we have done a report in the last years about the impact of spectrum prices on consumers, taking into account some recommendations like maximizing revenues from spectrum awards should no longer be a measure of success. In the past, we heard things like, "Hey, we raised a lot of money. This has been a successful auction." You know, auctions can deliver inefficient outcomes when are poorly designed, artificially limiting the supply of spectrum, including through set-asides, risk slowing services, and inflating price, as we will see. Spectrum should also be released to the market as soon as there are a business case for operators to use it, and policymakers should work with stakeholders to enable timely, fair, and effective spectrum licensing to the benefit of society. And we have seen some negative impact of high spectrum prices, like poor coverage, more expensive services, and of course, slower speeds. And we all know that spectrum makes big money. I mean, we have seen this in the region, in other regions, you know, high numbers, auctions here and there, and a lot of money raised from spectrum auctions. But are all the countries paying the same for spectrum? Well, the answer is no. There is a huge variation in prices paid. Some countries are paying vastly more than others. And this chart shows prices for spectrum awards in more than 100 countries over the recent area. And this is about 4G area. In some cases, high prices are driven by strong market demands, and this is fine. If there is more money to be made, operators will be prepared to pay more for spectrum. In other cases, it is a major concern that high spectrum prices negatively impact consumers. In developing markets, treasurers often set reserve price to maximize revenues. Sometimes regulatory tell us, hey, I have nothing else to say. And that's why we are also focusing as GSMA, not only in telecoms policymakers or telecoms regulators, but also in other government officials like finance ministries, for instance. So also in developed markets, other awards decision drives up spectrum prices. For example, set-asides or lot size decisions inflate prices. So does it matter if spectrum prices are high? Well, some people might say no. If you're among of those, maybe we should review that approach. So in 2018, a report, we look at spectrum pricing in developed market that was commissioned and was produced by us. And what we found in that report shocked us. spectrum prices were systematically higher in developing market when income levels were taken into account. So by factoring in income, we felt we got a better sense of affordability. Final price, this is what we found out in our report that is public and you can download it, it's on our website. Final prices were 3 times higher in the developing market than in developed market. And reserve price were 5 times higher. Interestingly, high spectrum prices were found to be linked to countries with high levels of short-term national sovereign debt. Bears out what regulators say in treasuries set reserve price. Spectrum is being used basically to raise money. So in a recent, in 2019 report, we look at the effects on consumers of spectrum prices on and spectrum management across the world. So what did we find? High spectrum prices, negative effects on population coverage, and negative effects on network quality. Also, an interesting thing to mention is spectrum scarcity. Those that assign spectrums earlier enjoy faster deployments, 11 to 20 percentile points, that's what the report says. And more spectrum leads to faster download speeds. But just to be clear, and does this matter? Can spectrum prices impact consumers? Well, in a properly functioning market, for example, in a well-designed auction, operators bid for a spectrum based on its true market value. Unfortunately, spectrum prices are not always market-driven. In a distorted market where operators are being forced to pay above market rate for a spectrum, then they will need to change investment and pricing decisions, and this will indeed impact consumers. So the question really becomes, are spectrum prices reflective on their market rate? Unfortunately, they're often influenced by other factors. Governments are single sellers of spectrums and can exert market power to influence prices. So high reserve prices and annual fees, these discourage participations, leading to spectrum potentially going unsold, which is a disaster. And it was mentioned in the previous panel. I think Marta mentioned about spectrum that is available in countries but that has not been assigned. Well, this is one of the things that worries the industry. You know, what are the conditions that the industry have to access that spectrum, and we have examples in the region. Or it means spectrum sells for higher than the market really wants to pay, which, as we have seen, can harm also consumers. The telecom minister for one major development market said to us once, we can never sell spectrum for less than what we sold the previous band for. So benchmarking against previous awards in that country or some countries around or some countries in other regions is often used. But does this approach is still valid in the new role connectivity plays? A central issue also that's behind high spectrum price is spectrum scarcity. So limiting supply of spectrum can also inflate prices artificially. If you are dying of thirst in the desert, you overpay for water. And this can be done by reserving spectrum for a new entrant or a new vertical user, for example, in Germany with the 5G auction. So scarcity means services that are likely to be slower and more expensive and have worse coverage. Another version of artificial scarcity is the lack of a roadmap about when spectrum will be licensed in the future. So this uncertainty can also increase prices in auction as operators scramble to make sure that what they get is or eventually will be also available in the future. And spectrum roadmap is something we have been working also a lot in the region, and can also be a topic for another panel. So also the auction format can also be an important factor. Auctions can be designed to promote price discovery or to maximize revenues for bidders to compete, and we also have some examples about that. And last but not least is about the future of connectivity. So the connectivity has a role to play. We are having this event online with the people connected. We are connected to our families. We are still working because of connectivity. So in this new normality, how this is the way some people call it, the connectivity has a role to play, and probably the way the spectrum is awarded and the price that the industry pays to access to that spectrum, maybe that approach should be revised, you know, to build digital societies, to create more inclusion, and to have innovation and flexible regulation that will create a better future for all of us. So thank you for the time, and open for questions.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I think that the perspective is quite valuable, and we'll have some discussion on the thoughts that you've presented. The final speaker in the panel is Mariliana Mendes, Secretary General of ASIET. Let me introduce her properly. Yeah, she was a full-time member of the board of the Telecoms Regulatory Authority in Costa Rica for 8 years, serving 3 terms as president. And this board directed, organized, and supervised the opening of their local telecoms market, and was in charge of spectrum auctions, relevant market studies, network number portability, universal service fund projects, and sector statistics, among other important market regulatory processes. Before this, she'd worked for more than 6 years directly in the telecoms industry as project director in Latin America, deploying value-added networks in the whole region. And she has previously also occupied various high-level positions at important public and private ICT companies in Costa Rica. And she is now the Secretary General of ASIET, which is the Inter-American Association of Telecommunications Operators. So I'll welcome Mariliana to give us her presentation now. You have the floor.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you very much to the ITU and CTU for the invitation. For me, it's an honor to be here. Let me share the screen just a second. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes, it looks fine.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Quite well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's start. Well, my presentation is basically based on some general terms and concepts that are important for the 5G, 4G, and in general for connectivity in the Latin American and Caribbean region. First of all, I have the concept of coherent. I think it is very important for the region to have a coherent public policies in order to develop connectivity. The spectrum assignment and the spectrum pricing must be done within a coherent public policy framework. To develop this coherent digital policy must be done as with a multi-stakeholder approach. The public-private partnership is key to have a sustainable digital industry and therefore the necessary infrastructure development. I have to mention that definitely the connectivity has been key to mitigate the negative economic impact of the pandemic in the region. Therefore, it's necessary to assure the sustainability of the telecom industry considering the current circumstances, especially in Latin America and Caribbean. More than ever, it's necessary to foster digitalization through transversal public policy with focus on digital skills, investment, and for sure to foster innovation. Important to mention that identify and foster the integration of a larger digital ecosystem, including other economic sectors like education, health, agriculture, banking, energy, to mention some of them. This is important because the true digital transformation is going to come from these sectors, and we have to do a joint effort to really transform our region. Besides that, the fiscal load must be reasonable and coherent with the connectivity objectives and the positive externalities of the telecommunication industry. In some fiscal frameworks, for the connectivity is still being considered as a luxury, which is clear a contradiction with the objectives of universal service, and definitely the incentives for infrastructure development should be installed. These incentives must include the appropriate procedures to assign spectrum. This is very important. This public policy framework is the first step for any kind of effort of a spectrum assignment, and for sure spectrum pricing. This is something that is very important. Definitely the spectrum availability is key. My predecessors mentioned it. And it's also important that we are facing a new generation, a new generation of technology, a new generation of regulation. And we need to be clear on that, because the decision must be different than the ones that we used to take some years ago, especially under the circumstances of the pandemic. The new generation of a spectrum policy should give certainty in terms of legal rights for the whole ecosystem, in terms of the whole range of operators, timely assignments, and focus on quality and coverage of services, and definitely the avoidance of the tax collection approach to the spectrum assignments. To use the spectrum assignment process to resolve the tax revenue is not the right path for the economic recovery. The connectivity is the base for digital transformation, resilient cities, and resilient citizens. The relevance of a spectrum policy must be recognized by the authorities. Flexibility and pay or play options should be considered in the renewed standards for the spectrum national agenda. Also, modernize and simplify the telecom regulation. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I received a message from Zoom. I was worried, sorry. Okay, each spectrum assignment is different in terms of the type of the spectrum per se, for sure, but also each one must have a specific public policy objective to accomplish with the new spectrum. The reserve price must be a reflex of this object. The condition of the market will evolve in time, and that must be taken into consideration. Also, to review the fiscal load over the spectrum is a must. As I mentioned, the pandemic has been a game changer, especially for the industry in Latin America and Caribbean. The unpayment due to the COVID-19 situation in terms of the service is about 50% in some countries in Latin America and Caribbean. There are many law initiatives to add new specific taxes to the industry. I can say at least 2 per country to mention the list. And this is jeopardizing the sustainability of the business. At the same time, there are some countries that were able to assign a spectrum to tackle the traffic increase during this emergency. In a way, this is a recognition that more spectrum can be released and assigned in order to keep a better quality service. Right now, there are spectrum recurrent charges out of proportion. There are countries that have above 40, that countries where the operators have to pay over 45% of their income to the tax authority. And this is for 4G and all the generations before of technology. And what is going to happen with the 5G, because the 5G challenge is even bigger. What are the decisions to move forward? Well, in 4G, spectrum was still, unfortunately, still lagging behind the ITU recommendation. We are around the 20% average of the ITU recommendation for this year. So there is a lot of room to improve the 4G spectrum assignment. I have to mention that the most expensive spectrum is the one that is not being used to improve quality of life through connectivity services. This is something that we have to take into consideration, definitely. And also 4G and 5G are going to coexist for a long time. The correct public policies will speed up the 5G deployment, definitely. But we have to keep up the pace still with the 4G. There are some initiatives for innovation in the regulatory area, like regulatory sandboxes as a good alternative to adjust the telecom regulation. And still, we need to facilitate the infrastructure development, especially in the regions or municipalities or rural areas. The challenge, as I mentioned, is even bigger for technologies as 5G, but this is a problem that comes from the 2G technology. The infrastructure development is a very huge problem in Latin America, especially, as I mentioned, the municipalities have very difficult processes to going through in order to install infrastructure. And last but not least, closing the digital divide is a must, and under the current circumstances, it's necessary to rethink the toolkit and for sure the spectrum assignment, the spectrum prices, and we have a big challenge ahead in order to connect each person in the Latin America and Caribbean region. Thank you very much, and I'm available to answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marileana, and good perspective also put into the panel. We have, yes, some reasonable time for questions and further discussion now. Let me ask a general question, and I suppose Julian is the one who introduced the idea of the 5G business case. And I have a question, I guess initially to Julian, but anyone can answer. In the 5G business case, we talked about the three main, I guess, use cases: enhanced mobile broadband, massive machine-to-machine communications, and the ultra reliable low latency communications. And that's all in 5G. And we've seen in some of the developed countries auctions for 5G spectrum. But of course, the persons bidding are the big telecoms companies. My question is, if we have all these use cases, would there be other possible operating companies requiring 5G spectrum? And whether or not the type of auctions we are seeing would be appropriate for them to acquire the spectrum that they would need for these applications. So is it just only big telecoms operators we're dealing with? And if not, how do the smaller ones get access to 5G spectrum and at affordable prices? So I don't know if, Julian, you could start off, and maybe any of the other panelists could give
Okay,
their...
Nigel. It looks like a difficult question. I think it will depend in the country. For example, for the URLLC, possibly in big countries, industries which are vertically integrated could be interested to get part of the spectrum. But in the cases of middle and low income countries, in which typically we have 2 to 4 operators, and in most of the countries around 3 operators with networks, with networks deployed. I think it will be difficult to get national operators trying to get this kind of spectrum. Perhaps on a regional base, it will be interesting, and perhaps only in some markets which are attractive enough. But I wonder if business case will be possible for more than 3 or 4 operators in our countries. So that's my opinion.
Nigel,
Yes.
Yes, I'm thinking that as it relates to what obtains in similar industry, well, in other industries where blocks of spectrum are set aside for incumbents, or you may have a ranked system of potential applicants where spectrum is set aside for persons who are, who fall in category 1, category 2, or 3, depending on the reach of that particular entity. That's probably one way that some countries may undertake to approach this issue of ensuring that spectrum is made available, 5G spectrum is made available to small operators.
Yes, Lucas, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, no, just a comment on that. I think we believe that the shape of 5G connectivity for vertical is a dynamic challenge that can be efficiently determined through voluntary negotiations in the market, avoiding spectrum rights, fragmentations, or breaking the principle of service neutrality. So I think the telecoms industry has been an industry of scale, and there are also eventually other challenges when it comes to this spectrum for this assignment of spectrum for verticals. When it comes also technical challenge when it comes to synchronization and other stuff. So we think that the operators they can play a role in providing all the different or meeting all the needs that are required for the different industries. We are in this business, and we have been running networks for years. So that's our take on that question.
Okay. You have anything to add, Mariliana?
Thank you, Nigel. Well, I think the telecommunication industry is capital intensive and is based on a scale. It's difficult to move from there, but definitely there is room for partnerships within different size operators, and within also different type of companies within the ICT digital ecosystem. And there are some examples in Latin America, for example, IPT in Peru with Telefonica and some development banks, and also Facebook is there, and could be other smaller operators could be added to this partnership. The important thing here is that each one has its own role, and could be possible for them to negotiate in the different parts of the ecosystem.
Right. Looking at the Caribbean area, outside of auctions, is there any experience that you all might have had in terms of maybe giving some guidance to the smaller markets? I think that one of the questions in the Q&A was something along that line. Oh, but I guess it was answered. Yeah, so what other options you think can be recommended to smaller markets, you know, where you have maybe 2 operators with respect to assigning, where, you know, where there is not scarcity in that sense. So the idea of an auction might not be the appropriate methodology to use. How, any suggestions as to how we could come up with some reasonable pricing strategies there?
So I would go with like a general concepts, you know, like more supply, less demand. We are not saying that auction is the best mechanism or beauty contest is the best mechanism. Direct assignments can also be good. Those can be an option. So I don't think there are right or wrongs, you know, and I think all the different approaches could be analyzed. You know, there are good auctions, bad auctions. We talk about bad auction methodologies or designs, poor designs. There are good beauty contests. There are not that good beauty contests. So I think it should be analyzed like case by case. I don't want to give the impression that auction is the only tool and it's the best tool. So direct assignments can work, beauty contests can work, definitely. So that's my take on that.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Julian?
Yes, I think when you have in a situation when you don't have scarcity of the resource in the term that you explained, because we only have 1 or 2 operators, and auction mechanism is a challenge, in fact, because then you will not have a real auction when there are several companies interested in the resource trying to get that and giving the maximum value for it. But then you get in a position in which the reserve price that you define for the spectrum is a key element. Even if you are going to have a direct assignment, as Lucas said before, or if you doesn't matter the kind of mechanism, want to give the spectrum to the operators in order to get all these economic and social improvements that the spectrum and the services provided by it can give to the societies. Then most that try to give a specific recommendation on what is the mechanism. I think the key point is what is the reserve price for that spectrum, because this is an asset, and then you are in the position of the classical problem of the valuation of an asset. And when you have that, of course, it's not a good idea to get a lot of money for that resource, because then you have these problems with poor coverage, with slower speeds that Lucas explained before. But on the other hand, you cannot give that for free, because in fact there is a value associated with the spectrum, and it's a scarce resource. So it is difficult to try to understand what is the real business case of the operators, but you need to try to get a guess, and perhaps a conservative guess, because there is a lot of risk in to be aggressive and then get a very high value of the spectrum, and then you have all the problems associated with high values, like low coverage, high prices, low quality. But on the other hand, you cannot give a resource that is from the state for free.
You wanted to add something, Lindell? I see you.
Oh, well, no, not at this time, thanks. But I think I agree with what was said.
Right. And I think maybe some other flexible pricing mechanisms could be considered, because you don't necessarily want to have a very high reserve price that, you know, front loaded, whereby the operator has trouble to actually get the network built out and customers on board. That maybe you can consider something where that is dependent on the, or that can draw revenue out of the success of the operator, and maybe take the revenue down the road as the network grows, you know.
Incrementally, yes.
That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about.
Nigel?
Yes, Marilyn.
If I may. Thank you. I think it's important what you mentioned, because I would like to say it's not necessary to speak about spectrum auctions, but spectrum assignments. How
Yes.
to assign the spectrum to the operators. And definitely the spectrum has a value. It's a very important asset, but the most important value is the social value in terms of connectivity and to improve the quality of life of the population. So could be something like a public-private partnership with the governments, and the governments to support the deployment of the networks, for example, in some way, in terms of to facilitate the installation of infrastructure, for example, or to add some, in the case that will exist, the universal service funds, for example, to apply them. And another option is to play or pay with reasonable obligations in terms of coverage or in terms of quality of networks. That will be another option. I think this could be an opportunity for the Caribbean to explore new and different and above all innovative ways to assign the spectrum. And this is more difficult in some countries in Latin America, because they have in their laws the only possibility to assign a spectrum is to use an auction. But if you have the possibility, you can have more innovation in terms of regulation, in terms of obligations to the operators in a reasonable way, and to maximize, as I mentioned, the social value of the networks, and for sure of the spectrum.
Yes, indeed. If I look at the Q&A, there are still a couple of things outstanding, so maybe we can get to them. There is a question for Lindell from Alicia Sutherland of Jamaica. Can you explain the major factors that have driven the prices that have increased and decreased the most for mobile and microwave links? What factors do you think?
Okay. In the case of mobile, it's really a function of demand. So the values for some bands ended up just being higher, just for the fact that they're now greater in demand. And so that would have accounted for the changes, the increased changes in mobile. Where there is a decrease, then the flip side applies, where a band is not in demand as it would have been, a few years back. Like take for instance the 1800 band, where we hardly hear of any LTE networks being employed in that band. And so that demand certainly would have gone down. So it's really a function of demand based on the bands that are desired. With respect to the microwave, the algorithm is now applied using a per link basis rather than points of presence. And so
what basis?
Per link basis rather than
per
points
link,
of right, yes. Rather than points of presence. And the use of the points of the per link basis would have removed some of the duplication which would have featured in the billing.
Okay. Also to the panel, this one is from Kirk Sukram from Trinidad and Tobago. should the technology employed, meaning 5G, influence the price of the spectrum, or should the price be based on the services to be provided? For example, whether you're using it for mobile broadband or you're using it for fixed wireless access, as the case might be. So yes, Julian.
Both of them influence the price of the spectrum. Of course, the kind of technology that you are using will influence the CapEx and OpEx needed to deploy the business. And on the other hand, the kind of services that you have, that you provide, the volumes of traffic involved in that services, and the number of customers that you will get for each business case also influence the income of the business. So when you have a valuation problem, what you would really have is a cash flow problem. And then you need to determine what are the incomes and what are the CapEx and OpEx of the process. And in that sense, the answer, in my opinion, is both of them.
The answer is?
Both of them,
both of them.
will make influence the price. The technology will influence, and the kind of services will influence.
Services will also influence it. Okay, thank you. Lucas, you have a
No, yeah, just to add that, you know, at the end, how much is being paid for an asset, it depends on what's the kind of business you can make. You know, what's the business case behind that? What's the flexibility? That's why, connected to something that Mariliana said, we are also and moving a little bit away from spectrum pricing, we are all the time looking for flexible regulation, you know, ex post regulations that allows innovative service. So the more that's allowed, then that is what makes much more sense. And a concept that I like is that, you know, the spectrum does not have a price per se. It's not having 1 kilo of gold. So I have 1 kilo of gold. I know I have it. You know, I have gold at home, and I know it's worth, I know, $100,000. I don't know how much is gold, but the spectrum does not have a price per se. It only adds value if there is a company that invests capex on that deploys antennas, deploys connectivity, and turns that spectrum into connectivity that boosts economy, that allow us to stay close to our relatives, to keep working, etc. So there is no, sometimes I have conversations with government saying, no, I have the 700 megahertz band over there just waiting, you know, to get the money out of that band. Well, it's not the way it should be seen, you know. There is no value of the spectrum per se. Just those two comments.
Yeah. I guess it's a point of view. The government might tell you different.
Yeah, like everything in life, it's different points.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Let me see. Fausto Zambrano from Honduras is asking, what if the panelists have any thoughts about the renewal process of licenses? I'm not sure in what exact sense he's thinking of there. Maybe it's from the point of view of operators' licenses. Maybe if they come up at this time, and those operators have spectrum, whether there'll be any impacts. I'm not quite clear myself.
Right. Or Nigel, not sure if the person is asking in light of the current pandemic as to, you know, in terms of those who may have an expectation for revenue, whether those expectations should be tempered in light of what we're going through.
Well, that's a good question to put out there. Certainly the prices, the license prices would have been based on a certain expectation. And if it is that a force majeure has occurred that prevents that from happening, it probably is a good argument to bring for some sort of negotiation or renegotiation with the regulator.
Nigel, if I may.
Yes.
So probably one or two concepts on that. You know, we also have reports about license renewals. So for our friend from Honduras, I will be happy to share that report with him on license renewal. So license renewal, renewal is important, is key for operators, but it should not be an auction. Actually, there are some new approaches about that, like France, for instance, that is renewing licenses by exchanging into connectivity projects, the renewals. So what we see is that probably a new approach is about turning those renewals into connectivity. So that's one thing. And if I have another 10 seconds, there is a question about South Korea and the 5G auction. Yeah. So this is one of the examples, you know, when it comes to, and I mentioned this in my presentation about benchmark. So different countries, different regions has also different ARPUs, different GDPs. You know, if you compare the ARPU of South Korea is many times higher than the ARPU in Latin America. So you know, if we take into account that, you know, that kind of benchmarks, it could be dangerous, you know, because the reality of the different countries are different. But there are also other interesting examples in Southeast region, like Hong Kong, Japan, where they just awarded for a fraction of the price spectrum, you know, to focus on better services and new deployments. So so yeah, that's my stake on that.
Thank you. Well, we are just about out of time.
Nigel?
What I will do is allow you all to give a last word, a short last word on what you think we should take away from the discussion. I'll start with Maria Leana, as she was.
Yes. Thank you. Just a couple of thoughts about the questions. I have to mention that this is a business. Telecommunication is a business. So it has to respond to a business case. And if the business case is positive, so then the investment is going to be done. If not, it's just not possible. And in that sense, the economic landscape, it's a main portion of this business case, especially now with the whole economic crisis related with the COVID-19. So this is something that it's important to mention, because this is going to be a game changer. So from my point of view, the Caribbean has a huge opportunity if they have the flexibility within their own regulation to change the way the spectrum is assigned. Right now, it's important more than ever to have the social value of the spectrum, the social value of the connectivity to be placed in the first line. So this is important for the governments, for the regulators, for the operators, for the whole ecosystem, no matter the size of the type of operator. It is important for them to have a legal certainty, not only for the assignment of the spectrum, but also for the renewal processes, to know how we're going to face now or in the future the renewal or of their own licenses. So it's very important to recognize the main role that the connectivity is going to have in the economic recovery after the pandemic. And thank you very much again to the ITU and CTU for the invitation. And thanks for my co-panelists as well.
Yes, thank you, Maria Leana. Lindell?
Yes, Nigel, thanks. I think from where we sit, it's going to be a balancing act as we move forward. Certainly for the short to perhaps a medium term, governments and operators will have to sit at the table, maybe revisit the way how spectrum has been assigned, maybe temper expectations for revenue streams and for investments, you know, to see how best we can get back to where we ought to be. And I think the balancing act hopefully should get us back to where we are hoping to be within a few years' time.
Thank you. And Julian, you have the last word.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, I think that when you have working in spectrum management and evaluation, then the principles that you use for that are key. And if I think, for example, what Lindell explained, to have these principles, which means that the spectrum should be used to maximize the economic and social value of the spectrum. You let the spectrum to be used, as Maria Elena said, that the most expensive spectrum is that which is not used, and you need to let the spectrum be used. You cannot create a scarcity of the resource from the government point of view. If you promote the investment and the efficiency, but at the same time, you get that the state get some resources for economical resources for the spectrum, because this is the base to build a business, then you will get that balance that Lindell said.
Yes. Thank you very much. So I'll just thank all my panelists, Julian, Lindell, Lucas, and Marileana. I think we've had a wonderful session here, sharing the thoughts and expectations and recommendations coming from it related to spectrum pricing going forward. Thank you very much, folks, and thanks to all who participated as well and submitted your questions. Remember, we will be posting the presentation slides from today's sessions, both of them, on the ITU website in the coming days, and as well as the recording from the webinar. We have one more day tomorrow. There is one session which will be a roundtable on WRC 19 outcomes and the WRC 23 agenda challenges. We will start as usual at 9 a.m. and well, it's scheduled to run to 10:30, but depending on how it goes, we'll see when we end. So thank you very much to all again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again, joining us tomorrow for the final day. Oh, after the panel, we will just have a very short closing session. So please do come out and help us to end this 2-week event on a good.
Yes, Nigel. Just to remind tomorrow.
Oh yes, I keep forgetting to ask you if
tomorrow we have only one session, the wrap-up session related to a roundtable of WRC 19 outcomes and WRC 23 agenda regional preparation, followed with this closing remarks. Then tomorrow we are going to end earlier, and then you could enjoy your Friday.
Indeed. Okay, thank you very much, Joaquin. Thank you, folks. We end the webinar now. Thank you.